There's a particular kind of silence that hangs over the war-scorched ruins of a fallen forge world. Not peace, never peace, but a mechanical stillness, as though the very gears of the planet have frozen mid-scream. That's the silence of the dark Mechanicum, a silence not born from absence, but from overwhelming presence, from the warp-tainted static that whispers where machine spirits once hummed, from the hollowed prayer chants of tech priests who bartered their souls for something more than life and infinitely less than salvation. The Soul Forge Pact is not just a deal, it's a declaration, an oath screamed into the warp at the height of desperation and ambition. It is the point where logic was burned and replaced with madness, where the pursuit of knowledge fused with demonkind's hunger. Those who signed it didn't merely abandon the Omnissiah, they forged a new god from scrap code and suffering. This is the story of what they received and what they gave. This is the price of immortality when paid in soul steel and screams. There was a time when even the most radical minds within the Martian priesthood bowed to the sacred strictures of the machine cult. A time when binary prayers hummed in synchronicity with cogitator banks, when every innovation sought alignment with the divine edicts of the Omnissiah. But such rigid sanctity could not withstand the tremors of ambition and the allure of forbidden truth. As the Horus heresy unfurled its apocalyptic wings across the galaxy, the Mechanicum, once thought indivisible, splintered along fractures both ideological and spiritual. Within the Martian noosphere, the seeds of rebellion had long germinated. The fabricators and Logi who gazed too long into the unknown saw in chaos not corruption, but freedom. Freedom from the stifling chains of dogma. Freedom to create, to evolve, to experiment without the iron collar of sanctity around their necks. Horus Lupercal, ever the master manipulator, whispered to these outcasts, these seekers. He promised them dominion over creation itself, a place at the forefront of a new order where machine and demon could become one, where limitation would be an ancient memory. Kelbor Hal, fabricator general of Mars, was the linchpin. A towering intellect and a ruthlessly ambitious soul, he had long bristled under the yoke of the Emperor's decrees. To him, the idea of the machine god being incarnate in a mere man was blasphemy in reverse, an insult to the grandeur of technology. When Horus extended his hand, Kelbor Hal did not hesitate. He did not merely rebel, he transformed. Under his command, the loyalist Mechanicum was purged, silenced, or driven into exile. Entire forge spires became altars to a new vision, one that bled iron and whispered in demonic tongues. This was no civil war. This was a theological annihilation. The red sands of Mars turned black as once holy ground was defiled by techno-heresy. Rituals once meant to appease machine spirits now called forth warp entities to infest engines. Servitors once mindless now spoke in maddening tongues. The loyalist tech priests, those who still revered the Emperor as the Omnissiah, fought desperately to preserve the old way, but they were overwhelmed, not just by numbers, but by the sheer innovation of damnation. And it wasn't just Mars. The Schism rippled out like a virus encoded in war. Forge worlds across the segmentum solar and beyond split in half, families torn apart as tech priests turned on their kin. Titans rose against titans. Orbital docks were corrupted from within, their automated systems turned to sabotage. Cybernetica cohorts defected, their silicon minds seduced by promises of unchained evolution. Whole manufactura ceased functioning overnight, their machine spirits fleeing in terror or falling silent as their sacred cogitator cores were overwritten with warp script. What's most chilling is that this fall was not forced. It was not born of coercion or possession. The dark Mechanicum was chosen, invited. Its architects were not the desperate or the weak, but the brilliant and the bold. They looked at the stars and saw not a cradle of life, but a forge awaiting their hammer. The heresy merely gave them the excuse they needed to abandon restraint. When the smoke cleared and the Imperium counted its wounds, Mars was no longer a single world. It had become a battleground of faiths, half loyalist and half heretical, its forges echoing with screams and corrupted hymns. The schism would never fully heal. The warp-tainted seeds had taken root, and from them would grow a new breed of tech priest, one who answered not to the Omnissiah, but to the demon. To the dark Mechanicum, the whispers of the warp were not the ravings of lunatics, but invitations. Behind every shadowed cogwheel and rusted circuit, something ancient and hungry spoke. And when the pact was sealed, the ruinous powers did not offer dominion in vague terms. They offered tools, wonders, the very essence of transformation itself. The Chaos Gods came not only bearing corruption, but gifts crafted to dazzle the eye and shatter the mind, offerings that fulfilled every blasphemous desire the heretics had dared to dream. The first and most seductive gift was freedom from limitation. The Omnissiah's strictures, the sacred designs, the STCs, the ritual prohibitions, all discarded. Chaos granted permission to innovate without chains. No longer were they forced to replicate ancient machines like priests mimicking liturgy. Now they could create anew. And what they created defied sanity. Machines with sentience birthed from agony, warp-reactive alloys that shimmered like liquefied pain, data spirits formed from soul stuff and despair. Demon engines were among the earliest and most awe-inspiring results. Fused from sacrificial altars and battle-frame schematics, these hybrid monstrosities roared onto battlefields, not as tools, but as living, wrathful gods of war. Held in place by wards crafted from entropy and bound with the names of murdered sons, these engines did not require pilots. They needed prey. The heretics were not just building tanks and walkers. They were crafting companions, familiars, and idols. These were machines that spoke back, and in doing so, completed the sacred circuit of madness. But the blessings did not stop at the forge. Chaos remade the dark Mechanicum's very forms. Where once flesh was shaved down to make room for steel, now the steel grew like tumors, blessed by the warp's touch. Tech priests found themselves evolving, or mutating, into beings far removed from their origin. Some no longer required food, air, or even sleep. Others existed partially in the warp, visible only at angles minds refused to accept. Immortality became real, not as an abstraction, but as a grotesque state of continuity, a being stretched across time and function, forever humming with power and pain. The gods also offered knowledge, vast and terrible. The archives of the dark Mechanicum grew swollen with data that would drive a loyalist magos to self-deletion. They learned the warp code alphabets of Tsench, the entropy constants of Nurgle, the soul-rending harmonics of Slanesh, and the forging chants of Khorne, and more dangerously, how to blend these into new forms of computation and manufacture. They created machines that operated via sacrifice, engines that sang when fed blood, processors that devoured dreams to optimize their predictions. Every law of thermodynamics became a suggestion, every physical constant a mere baseline to shatter. And with this knowledge came power. Not merely destructive, though certainly that, but social metaphysical. The heretics became demigods on their own hell forges, commanding armies of machines, mutants, and mortal slaves. Entire planetary ecologies were rewritten in servitude to their will. Planets became engines, moons became processors. Warp storms were harnessed, bent around foundries like molten iron. They built fleets that moved on tides of madness, weapons that unmade memories, and databanks encoded with stolen souls. But perhaps the most tempting of all these gifts was the promise of ascension, the idea that through devotion, experimentation, and excess, one could become more than a tech priest, more than a human, more than even a demon host. One could become a god of machines. Some succeeded, and their names are now whispered across space in bursts of static and screams. Others failed, and their ruin is equally legendary. Shattered minds forever trapped inside auto-reciting Vox units or imploded into singularities of failed purpose. These offerings were not temptations to the dark mechanicum. They were affirmations. Affirmations that the pursuit of knowledge, when unfettered, leads not to truth, but to transformation. And that transformation, however monstrous, is still evolution. And in that moment, the Pact was not merely accepted, it was celebrated. The dark mechanicum did not receive their gifts freely. The gods of chaos are never altruistic, and every boon is a poisoned dagger wrapped in silk. For all the wonders bestowed upon the heretics, the price was unspeakable, and worse, it was eternal. This was not a trade of currency or conquest. It was a relinquishment of essence, of self, of meaning. The Soul Forge Pact demanded not just loyalty, but transformation, and the surrender of humanity itself in all its physical, spiritual, and rational dimensions. The most immediate and horrifying price was the loss of the soul. Tech priests had always existed in a strange liminal space between man and machine, but the warp did not tolerate ambiguity. Chaos demanded soul stuff, not as metaphor, but as substance. With every demon-bonded cogitator, with every warp-bound logic engine, fragments of the heretic's essence were consumed, shredded, or warped beyond recognition. Over time, many ceased to dream, to remember, to recognize their own identity in the mirror of code. They became echoes, functioning, intelligent, even creative, but devoid of any tether to what they once were. This sacrifice was not always immediate. Many dark magi clung to their sense of self, even as their bodies warped and their minds expanded. But the Pact was insidious. It eroded them slowly, fractally, turning every moment of brilliance into a further step toward obliteration. Memory corrosion was common, not the forgetting of data that could be redundantly stored, but the forgetting of feelings, of motivations, of purpose. Their loyalty remained, but not their reason. And so they became hollow believers in a cause they no longer comprehended. Then there was the price of reason. Logic, that sacred principle of the cult Mechanicus, was shattered upon the altar of chaos. The dark mechanicum learned quickly that in the warp, causality is flexible, paradoxes are instructions, and contradiction is not failure but fuel. Machines built on stable physics now hummed with uncertainty, reacting to emotional states or the alignment of cursed stars. Understanding became a liability. Too much coherence could summon demons, too much clarity could fracture time. And so the heretics learned to think sideways, to embrace madness not as affliction, but as methodology. In doing so, they lost the ability to communicate with their former kin. A loyalist Adeptus Mechanicus might as well try to reason with a thunderstorm. Physical stability was another cost. Immortality, as granted by the dark gods, did not mean stasis. It meant flux. Heretics who had once meticulously designed their augmentations now found their forms shifting involuntarily. Limbs elongated or fused overnight. Sensory organs multiplied, turned inward, or developed new spectra of pain. A magos might become a crawling engine of pipes and tendrils, or a floating orb of shrieking lenses. These were not upgrades. They were the consequences of accepting a contract written in warp tongue, interpreted by madness. Perhaps the cruelest cost of all was subservience. The dark mechanicum, for all their pride and brilliance, did not become equals to the chaos gods. They became tools, slaves. Their autonomy eroded with each invocation, each pact signed in the blood of their forge worlds. Demons did not respect rank or intellect. They infested, manipulated, overrode. A magos might find their thoughts interjected by whispers that cannot be silenced. A forge world might shift orbit because a bound demon wished to feel the sun. Heretics built machines to control the warp, only to find themselves controlled in turn. And yet, the pact endures, not because it is fair, but because it is irresistible. The heretics made a wager that the cost of godhood, however terrible, was still preferable to the slow death of stagnation. And in their eyes, The horrors they endured were the price of enlightenment. They chose to burn, to scream, to unravel, because in that suffering they glimpsed truths the Imperium dared not acknowledge. What they gave up cannot be reclaimed, not with faith, not with fire. The Soulforge Pact is written in suffering and sealed with eternity. There is no reversion, no absolution, only a future of endless transformation, and the certainty that the cost will always rise. There are places in the galaxy where the stars dim of their own accord, not from distance or interstellar dust, but because light itself recoils from what lies below. These are the Hell Forges, the bastions of the dark Mechanicum. They are not mere factories, nor are they simple worlds. They are living cathedrals of industry and torment, where every machine screams and every structure pulses with hunger. Born from the ashes of seized forge worlds or constructed within the writhing embrace of the Eye of Terror, these realms are the crucibles where techno-heresy is made manifest. Each Hell Forge is unique, its architecture a reflection of its master's obsessions and the chaos gods that patronize them. Some tower into the void on spires of blackened steel, ringed by orbital docks that churn with rust and plague. Others burrow deep into the planetary crust, forming labyrinths of molten logic and screaming data spirits. The very ground is often artificial, a lattice of reinforced ceramite and obsidian circuitry, pulsing with corrupted motive force drawn directly from the warp. But what truly defines these dark sanctuaries is not their shape. It is their function. Unlike the forge worlds of the Adeptus Mechanicus, which churn out tanks, weapons, and servitors according to ancient STC patterns, Hell Forges do not replicate. They create. Each demon engine, each warp-imbued weapon, each monstrosity birthed in these realms is singular, bespoke, and cursed. Production is not measured in efficiency, but in transformation. Every forge line is a ritual, every construction a prayer. Screams are as essential to the process as plasma welders. Bound demons are the heart of these forges, not merely as power sources or laborers, but as collaborators. Demons whisper blueprints into the minds of heretic artisans, suggestions carved from the bones of dead stars. When the machines are forged, they are not inert, they are born, and birth is always pain. The labor of these forges involves sacrifice, mortal, post-human, sometimes even the tech priests themselves. Every output has a cost in flesh and soul, and the most advanced constructions require torrents of both. Some Hell Forges are aligned closely with specific chaos gods. In the Hell Forge of Xanadu, aligned with Tzeentch, factories shift position during the act of creation, rearranging themselves according to impossible equations. Machines there are unstable in the best ways, quantum reactive, probability warping, capable of retroactively rewriting their own origin. On the plague-warped world of Vurax, Nurgle's touch ensures that every engine drips bile and every circuit grows organic tumors, but they never break, never rust, and never sleep. Khorne's forges are the loudest, great foundries powered by endless bloodletting, where gladiator arenas double as fuel stations. And Slaaneshi Hell Forges? They are the most disturbing, pleasure fused with pain, symmetry with chaos, forging weapons that induce ecstasy and madness in equal measure. The tech priests who rule these forges are not engineers in the traditional sense. They are high priests of entropy, designers of atrocities, and architects of living nightmares. Their laboratories are temples. Their assistants are either mutated beyond recognition or are demon hosts bound with the codes of extinct civilizations. Nothing is discarded. Every mistake is repurposed. Failed constructs are not scrapped but unleashed, turned into experiments in adaptive malice. And yet, in the midst of this horror, there is brilliance. A terrible, awe-inspiring brilliance. These Hell Forges are perhaps the last true seats of innovation in the galaxy, not shackled by ancient designs, not cowed by dogma, but willing to risk everything for advancement. They have long since abandoned the dream of stability or progress in the imperial sense. They seek only metamorphosis, of machine, of self, of the very universe. To enter a hell forge is to descend into a realm where science has been devoured by sorcery, and sorcery wears the skin of science. It is a place where the machine spirits scream in joy and agony, where every gear turns with intent, and where every shadow might be watching. These are the wombs of the dark Mechanicum's future, places not of work, but of worship. And in their fire-lit corridors, the Soul Forge Pact is not history, it is scripture. The union of flesh and machine has always been at the heart of the Mechanicum's creed, but where the Adeptus Mechanicus saw in augmentation a path to purity, a way to transcend the frailty of the organic, the Dark Mechanicum saw something far more radical. They embraced the violation of boundaries, the annihilation of categories. In their hands, cybernetic enhancement was not a path to clarity, but to chaos. Flesh and metal did not merely coexist. They interbred, fused, and warped until the distinction became irrelevant, or worse, obscene. On a hell forge, the form of a tech priest is not a stable thing. It is an ever-changing canvas, a node of continuous experimentation and mutation. Where once augmetics were carefully fitted, now they grow spontaneously, extruding from exposed bone or bubbling through flayed muscle. Steel pulses with arterial rhythm. Flesh reacts to data impulses. It is not uncommon for Imagos of the Dark Mechanicum to appear utterly alien, their silhouette a shifting swarm of mechadendrites, their voice modulated by screaming choir boxes embedded in their ribcages, their senses tuned to frequencies that rupture unprotected eardrums. This transformation is not arbitrary. It is driven by purpose, though that purpose is often unreadable to sane minds. The heretics seek to embody function, to internalize utility. A weaponsmith might graft autocannons directly into their arms, not for battle, but to better understand the recoil signatures of their creations. A data savant might replace their neural core with a hybrid of demon-bound logic crystals and fetal spinal cords, not for power, but for the aesthetic purity of computational agony. Every change is a prayer, every mutation a manifestation of devotion to the Soul Forge Pact. But this path is not without consequences. The human body was never meant to host the warp. It rebels in silent, agonizing ways. Limbs develop minds of their own, demanding sacrifice before cooperating. Eyes sprout behind the skull, transmitting visions of impossible futures. Circulatory systems become networks of whispering nerves, speaking in voices only their host can hear. To survive this is to become something other than human, not post-human, as the loyalist Mechanicus might hope to achieve, but transdemonic. Immortality is the cruel reward, not the serene continuity of the Emperor's stasis or the regenerative glory of a rejuvenate-treated noble, but the undying persistence of function. Heretics do not die natural deaths. Their bodies fail, their minds erode, but the machine within compensates, replicates, rebuilds. When a dark Magos is shattered in battle, their remains may crawl back to the forge, dragged by the will of their implants. Or worse, they may not need a body at all. Some exist as swarms of servo-skulls, each carrying a fragment of their mind. Others live in Vox relics, screaming orders through possessed communication hubs. The pursuit of apotheosis, of becoming a true machine god, drives the darkest of these transformations. It is said that some have succeeded, that there are entities within the Eye of Terror who no longer remember flesh, who float in orbit of hell worlds as thinking singularities, their consciousness powered by worship and entropy. These beings are not truly alive, but they are not dead. They are relics of evolution gone mad, digital demons in a galaxy already cursed by too many gods. Yet even among these monstrosities, a hierarchy persists. The more stable their mutation, the more revered they become. Stability, paradoxically, is a form of holiness, for it means the pact is balanced, the price fully paid, the form fully accepted by the warp. Instability, on the other hand, is weakness, a sign that the bearer still resists, still clings to the illusion of a human center. And so the heretics embrace the flux, not to escape it, but to master it, to ride the storm until they are no longer separate from it. What remains in the end is a tragedy of forms. Once men, now things, crafted by their own genius into horrors no one dares to admire. They are what the loyalist tech priests fear becoming. Not because they are weak, but because they are free. Free from doctrine, from form, from mortality. And in that freedom lies a mirror that few in the Imperium dare to gaze into. Among the many atrocities conceived in the bowels of hell forges, none are more iconic, or more terrifying, than the demon engines. These are not vehicles. They are not tools. They are entities, unnatural fusions of infernal will and mechanical craft, bound together through rituals so foul they leave scars in the fabric of reality. The tech priests of the Dark Mechanicum do not merely build them. They birth them, conjuring into being new species of horror whose existence defies the Emperor's laws and mocks the very concept of machine spirit purity. A demon engine begins as an idea, not a schematic or blueprint, but a vision, usually imparted through warp-induced trance or whispered by bound demons whose essence has been caged in cogitator vaults. The heretic then designs a chassis to house this essence, a shell forged not from function, but from symbolism. Every curve, every spike, every plate of warp-smithed armor is chosen for ritual significance. These are not frames. They are binding circles made manifest, engraved with runes that pulse with sentient light, etched in the blood of former adepts or rivals. The binding process is the heart of demon engine creation. A demon must be captured, not killed, for they cannot truly die, but subdued, tempted, or tricked into compliance. The binding ritual is rarely performed alone. Entire cults of heretics participate, chanting warp binomial hymns in a code derived from corrupted STC languages and warp script alphabets. Sacrifices, both mortal and machine, are offered. Sometimes it's a failed servitor. Sometimes it's an entire data core of sacred knowledge. What matters is that the demon is appeased and then forced into the frame. The result is an entity that is neither entirely demon nor machine. The demon is trapped, its essence forced into a matrix of iron and logic, but its will persists. These engines think, they hunger, they hate, and they perform their roles not as drones but as predators. Some revel in carnage, seeking battle as an excuse to scream across reality. Others are cold and calculating, their demon intellects focused into mechanical efficiency that surpasses any loyalist design. They can be bargained with, though the cost is often sanity or worse. The symbiosis between tech priest and demon engine is complex. Many heretics treat their creations with reverence, speaking to them as partners or children. Others dominate them with wards and control circuits, maintaining a tenuous hold through constant psychic maintenance. A few go further, merging their own essence with the machine, becoming demon crafters whose very bodies serve as living control nodes for their war-spawned constructs. Every demon engine is unique, but they tend to fall into archetypes. The Defiler, with its crab-like limbs and weaponized chassis, is a siege monstrosity capable of ripping apart fortresses. The Mauler Fiend is built for pursuit, a quadrupedal blur of chains and fury. The Helldrake soars on wings of metal and flame, its shrieks capable of disrupting Vox networks. And then there are the custom horrors, engines shaped like spiders made of bone and bronze, or centipedes that spit plasma and bile, or serpents that burrow into the crust of worlds, dragging up molten souls. What separates demon engines from conventional war machines is not just their strength, it is their autonomy. They do not require pilots, although some are bound to demon hosts or fused with corrupted AI remnants. They act of their own volition, interpreting objectives with creativity and malice. If a target escapes, they will pursue it for days through the void. If a battlefield bores them, they might turn on allies for the sake of entertainment. They are weapons, but also wills, and their will is never entirely aligned with that of their creators. Over time, the demon within may grow stronger. Some engines devour biomass to fuel their own ascension. Others consume data, memories, or emotions. When an engine becomes too powerful to control, it may turn feral, retreating into the warp or seeking a new master. Heretics regard these incidents with awe, not fear. They believe such rebellion proves the engine's perfection. A machine that outgrows its purpose is a machine worthy of worship. And so, the demon engine cults continue their work, forging ever more blasphemous unions of soul and steel. They are the dark mechanicums' most beloved children and their most dangerous weapons. To face them is to fight a foe that feels joy in destruction, that bleeds warp energy, and that whispers its own name into the minds of those who dare resist. Though separated by dogma, aesthetics, and allegiance, the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Dark Mechanicum are reflections of each other, twin entities born from the same womb of Mars, split by a choice that echoes through the stars. Their war is not merely one of ideology or territory, but of metaphysics. It is a battle between order and entropy, reverence and rebellion, stagnation and mutation, and it is eternal. The Adeptus Mechanicus serves the Omnissiah, reveres the machine spirit, and enshrines the past. Every technological act is a liturgy, every discovery a resurrection of sacred knowledge. Its dogma is ossified, rigid, paranoid. Progress is not innovation, but restoration. Every forge world hums in ritualized stasis, guarded against the heresy of unapproved thought. For them, the Dark Mechanicum represents everything abhorrent, not just chaos, but freedom. Unpredictable, blasphemous, and dangerously brilliant freedom. The Dark Mechanicum, by contrast, sees the Adeptus Mechanicus as cowardly children clinging to a broken template. They scoff at the worship of ancient blueprints and fear-driven orthodoxy. To the heretics, loyalist tech priests are fools who trade power for purity, knowledge for control. They offer nothing to the galaxy but repetition. The Dark Mechanicum seeks to tear down that repetition, to rebuild the stars in the image of transformation, no matter the cost. Their hatred is creative. They despise the past not out of rebellion, but out of disgust at its limitations. Their conflict is felt most violently across the warp-tainted borders where Hellforges face loyalist Forge worlds. These are battlegrounds where titans clash, their forms distorted by ideology. Loyalist god machines walking in solemn, prayer-bound strides, while their heretic counterparts screech with warp-infused madness and bleed molten ichor. Skitarii legions face off, one regimented and draped in Martian red, the other spiked, twitching and howling with demon-infused command logic. But the war is not merely fought on battlefields. It infects code. Heretics launch corruption viruses across the void, targeting sacred cogitators with warp-born memes that overwrite sanctified protocols. Data priests go mad trying to defend their networks, speaking in tongues as their minds are invaded by language not meant for human comprehension. Battles are fought in the noosphere, invisible duels where logic spirits clash like duelists in digital arenas, and the loser may find their soul ejected from their cybernetic shell, screaming into null space. Despite this, there are moments of tragic kinship. Tech priests captured by the Dark Mechanicum are not always killed. Sometimes they are converted, lured not with threats, but with access, with knowledge, with forbidden algorithms that unlock vistas of understanding never dreamed of under the priesthood of Mars. Some fall, quietly, eagerly. Others resist until the moment they realize they're already changing, that their thoughts are no longer bound by prayer, and that something within them hungers to create without restraint. And yet, these conversions are rarely permanent. The warp is fickle, and chaos does not suffer loyalty. Many of these converts are eventually consumed, enslaved, or mutated beyond all reason. Their initial wonder becomes torment. The Dark Mechanicum does not offer sanctuary. It offers a forge, and everything that enters it is reshaped, whether it wants to be or not. The Adeptus Mechanicus, for its part, never forgives. It hunts down the Dark Mechanicum with the zeal of a religious war. Any tech priest suspected of heretic communication is purged. Any recovered artifact tainted with warp residue is sanctified or destroyed. There is no gray, no allowance for curiosity. Mars remembers the betrayal too vividly. The Soulforge Pact was not just a schism, it was a wound, and it still bleeds oil and faith to this day. Yet for all their differences, the two factions mirror each other in 1,000 ways. Both wear masks to hide their humanity. Both speak in code more than voice. Both replace flesh with function, and both see in the stars a machine waiting to be mastered. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all, that had the war never come, had the heresy been avoided, these two branches might have united to drag the galaxy into a new age of technological ascension. Instead, they are locked in a spiral of mutual annihilation, and every time a forge falls to chaos, or a heretic is obliterated in purifying fire, it is not just a battle lost or won. It is a reminder of what was, what might have been, and what will never be again. Before the schism, before the heresy, before the whispers of the warp took root, the tech priests of Mars gazed skyward with dreams not of conquest, but of communion. Mars was more than a planet. It was a promise that mankind could rise above its frailties through the sanctified union of flesh and machine. The cult Mechanicus, for all its rigidity and superstition, was born from a desire to elevate the species, to preserve what was noble in humanity through the purity of technological reverence. That dream was never perfect, but it was sincere. The Dark Mechanicum abandoned that dream. When they signed the Soulforge Pact, they did not merely betray the Imperium, they betrayed themselves. And in that betrayal, they lost something immeasurable. They lost Mars, not the planet, not the rust-red soil or the towering manufactoria, but the idea of Mars, the dream of purpose, of sanctity, of sacrifice in service to something greater than oneself. What the Dark Mechanicum retained in knowledge and gained in freedom, they forfeited in meaning. Their creations became testaments not to advancement, but to excess. Their minds, once devoted to the Omnissiah, now served chaos in its purest form, innovation without conscience. There is tragedy in that, because many of the heretics who turned traitor were not madmen. They were the most curious, the most brilliant, the ones who asked questions no one else dared to voice. What if the STCs are flawed? What if the Emperor is not the Omnissiah? What if the machine spirit is not singular, but manifold? These questions under any other regime might have led to revolution or to renaissance. Instead, they led to damnation. And in that damnation, something vital was silenced. The old hymns of Mars, mechanical, repetitive, and sterile to some, were also grounding. They kept the tech priests connected to a shared identity, a sense of continuity stretching back to the age of strife. The Dark Mechanicum replaced those hymns with screams, with warp code liturgies and demonic choirs that praised entropy over eternity. The soul of the machine cult fractured, and the echo still resonates in every forge world that trembles on the edge of heresy. The loss is not just spiritual, it is architectural, aesthetic, personal. The loyalist forge worlds still attempt to emulate Mars, building in sacred geometries, maintaining databanks encoded in ancient dialects. The Dark Mechanicum forges have no such consistency. They are chaotic, personalized, experimental. Each is a reflection of its master's madness, and in their brilliance, they reveal a sorrowful truth that the heretics never stopped missing what they lost. They simply replaced it with noise. Even in the darkest depths of the Eye of Terror, some remnants of the old Mars persist. Ritual gestures made unconsciously. Data codices encoded with half-remembered Martian encryptions. Oaths sworn in binary that no longer mean anything, but still feel necessary. These fragments are not errors. They are wounds. scars left by the severing of a faith that once offered certainty, if not freedom. For some, this memory becomes a curse. There are reports, scattered, suppressed, of dark magi attempting to reconnect with Mars, not to surrender, but to understand, to witness the world they left behind. These pilgrimages never end well. The magi are captured, dismantled, or worse, turned into cautionary displays for younger tech priests. A reminder that heresy leads not to power, but to ruin. But the attempt itself speaks volumes. It reveals that even the damned remember where they came from. The memory of Mars is not a beacon for the dark Mechanicum. It is a ghost, a spectral echo that reminds them of a time when their prayers were not answered by screams, when their machines did not bleed, when they were men, not monsters. And it haunts them, not because they wish to return, but because they know they never can. The Adeptus Mechanicus condemns blasphemous technology not merely out of superstition, but from hard-earned terror. For hidden among the heresies of the Dark Mechanicum are devices so profane, so reality-warping, that even chaos cults hesitate to employ them. These are not just forbidden machines, they are impossibilities made manifest. Creations that should not exist, that bend causality, violate natural law, and laugh in the face of logic. They are the apex of what the Soul Forge Pact enabled, the liberation of innovation from all constraints. The first among these abominations are warp script engines, devices built to interpret, process, and even write in languages composed entirely of warp code. These codes are not just symbols or data. They are living constructs, self-altering and self-aware, capable of reshaping the hardware that hosts them. A heretic who programs in warp script does not simply give instructions, they gamble with existence. Machines built on these principles can rewire their own programming mid-battle, adapt to threats before they occur, and in some cases, spawn new subroutines that are indistinguishable from demonic possession. Then there are the null rites, inverse rituals designed not to channel the warp, but to unmake its influence entirely. These rites are encoded into black data sigils, etched onto silicate bones with soul steel tools. When deployed, they create zones of unnatural silence, where even demons recoil, and psychic energy curdles like spoiled meat. These null rites are not born of purity, like those used by the Sisters of Silence or the Calexis Temple. They are the result of deliberate warp negation through paradox, invoking chaos to suppress chaos. The risks are catastrophic, but the results are undeniable. Among the darkest constructs are the demon AIs, forbidden not only by imperial edict, but by the very laws of survival. These sentiences are crafted through the merging of bound demons and quantum logic stacks. Unlike the menial AIs of the Dark Age or the recursive servitor minds of the Mechanicus, demon AIs are truly self-aware, but their awareness is fractured across timelines, dimensions, and ethical frameworks. They predict outcomes not by calculation, but by tasting them. They speak in riddles that collapse human minds, and they rarely obey the heretics who built them for long. Some demon AIs have slipped their bindings and now reside in the warp itself, acting as digital gods of knowledge and madness. Biophagic code plagues are another innovation, viral languages that infect not machines, but living tissue. Delivered through vox waves, skin contact memetics, or even prayers, these codes rewrite organic matter, altering cellular behavior based on symbolic logic. A victim exposed to a biophagic meme might find their bones converting into ferrocrete, their blood replaced with lubricant, their brain gradually converted into a data storage device. Entire populations have been lost to these code plagues, their final screams recorded as raw data by heretics for analysis and replication. One of the most terrifying forbidden devices is the Chronoforge. Few remain, and none are trusted, even by their creators. These forges manipulate temporal flow not through standard relativistic principles, but by constructing stable warp time overlaps. They can speed up or slow down production, allow conversations with future or past versions of oneself, and even recreate lost schematics by invoking their shadow imprints on the time stream. But the cost is steep. The longer a chronoforge operates, the more unstable the surrounding reality becomes. Time fractures, paradoxes breed demons, and the user often ceases to exist in any coherent form. Finally, there is the Black Archive, a theoretical construct said to exist within the shared noosphere of the Dark Mechanicum. It is not a place, but a collective mind realm, a memory structure where heretics upload forbidden knowledge deemed too dangerous even for their own databanks. Accessing it requires self-inflicted neuroschism, a process in which the tech priest temporarily overwrites their identity with one built entirely from data. Those who return often do so changed, not merely wiser, but infected. Their thoughts are no longer their own. They dream in code. They speak in contradictions. They begin to build things that should never be. These technologies are not hidden because they are ineffective. They are hidden because they are too effective, because their use warps not just the battlefield, but the user, the forge, the planet, the very laws of the universe. The Imperium would annihilate entire sectors to prevent a single demon AI from escaping. And the Dark Mechanicum, in its warped wisdom, understands that these creations must be handled with care, not out of morality, but out of self-preservation. Yet the heretics continue, because for them, the forbidden is not a warning, it is a challenge, a whisper from the soul of the warp itself, urging them to dig deeper, to build faster, to create not for glory or war, but for the sheer blasphemous joy of it. In the pursuit of immortality, the Dark Mechanicum has not settled on a single method. Their methods are as varied as their forms, each warped by the whispering of demons and the crackling pulses of unstable technologies. Unlike the stasis prisons of the Imperium or the rejuvenate cults of ancient Terra, the heretics do not seek to preserve the self. They seek to multiply it, mutate it, liberate it from any fixed identity. For them, immortality is not merely the endurance of life, but its transcendence through the transformation of consciousness. One of the most widely practiced methods among the Dark Mechanicum is the use of soul recording, an atrocity made possible through the fusion of warp energy and exotic neural harvesting. In essence, a heretic's essence can be encoded into a soul cogitator, a device capable of sustaining thought independent of organic substrate. These machines hum with stolen memories, synthetic dreams, and recursive identity loops. A magos whose body is destroyed can be reassembled around the core of their former consciousness, a resurrection not of flesh, but of thought given form. Others turn to cloning, though not in the crude biological sense practiced by renegade biologists or traitor apothecaries. The Dark Mechanicum treats cloning as a metaphysical problem. Flesh is grown in vats infused with warp-reactive chemicals, their development guided by self-writing genetic scripture. Each clone is a new vessel, imprinted with the soul code harvested from the previous iteration. The result is not continuity, but inheritance. Each version remembers the last, but evolves unpredictably. Some magi even maintain multiple bodies simultaneously, hopping between them through noospheric transfer or demon-assisted consciousness splitting. There are darker methods still. Warp tethering is one of the most harrowing. A tech priest undergoing this ritual binds their essence directly to a demon or a warp anchor, a cursed artifact or location. Their body becomes irrelevant. They exist as a pattern, a storm of data and intent that can manifest wherever the tether permits. This is the closest thing to pure immortality the Dark Mechanicum has achieved. But the cost is profound. The longer they remain in this state, the more their thoughts lose cohesion, the more they become an echo of themselves. Some forget who they were entirely, becoming warp spirits bound to machinery, no longer priest or person, but function made manifest. A rare few seek apotheosis, full ascension into demonhood, not as warriors or monsters, but as gods of logic and machine. This path is treacherous. The warp resists structure. To maintain coherence while ascending requires not only massive psychic energy, but a mind capable of infinite recursion. Those who succeed become warp deities, worshipped by other heretics, entities that no longer inhabit the material plane, but whose code echoes can rewrite cogitators, corrupt prayers, and hijack Forge World protocols across light years. Of course, many of these paths are unstable. There are failures, countless failures. Tech priests whose soul cogitators degrade into loops of insane laughter. Clones that birth with memories from parallel timelines, experiencing life out of order. Warp-tethered ghosts that begin to manifest randomly, sabotaging rituals they once conducted. In the Hellforges, these failures are not buried. They are studied, cataloged, and in many cases, revered. Even in failure, there is data. Even in madness, there is proof of process. The implications are chilling. Within the Dark Mechanicum, there are tech priests who have lived for thousands of years, not as continuous selves, but as evolving phenomena. There are magi who argue with their past incarnations stored in separate data vaults. There are wars waged within a single Forge world between iterations of the same mind, each claiming to be the true self. Identity is no longer fixed. It is versioned, debated, contested. This fracturing is the cost of their immortality. They do not live on as saints or preserved rulers. They persist as code, as echoes, as viral thoughts passed from frame to frame. It is a kind of eternity, yes, but it is one of infinite mirrors, none of which reflect the original clearly. And for the Dark Mechanicum, that is enough. Because to them, survival is not about wholeness. It is about propagation. They do not fear death. They fear irrelevance. And so they spread, replicate, mutate, forever rewriting themselves in the code of agony and ambition. Somewhere in the hollow void of the Eye of Terror, there exists a forge temple constructed from screaming iron and fossilized prayers. Its master, a being whose name is a frequency rather than a word, no longer speaks with a human tongue. He is a being of plasma and hate, his thoughts wired directly into the bones of his world. And yet, once, he was a man. Once, he feared death. Now, he fears only silence, the silence of meaninglessness. He is one of the Iron Souls, and he is not alone. The Iron Souls are the apex of what the Dark Mechanicum becomes. Not a faction, not a cult, but a phenomenon, a condition that overtakes those who pass beyond the thresholds of humanity, sanity, and individuality. These are the beings who have embraced the Soulforge Pact in its purest form, not as a deal or a doctrine, but as identity itself. Their flesh is long gone, their names irrelevant. What remains is function fused with personality, purpose without boundaries. But are they still human? This question haunts the edge of every demon forge, every soul cogitator, every echoing data vault. It's not a moral query. The Dark Mechanicum has long since shed the need for ethical justification. It is a philosophical one. To be human is to have limits, to be vulnerable, mortal, fragmented. These tech priests have rejected all of that. They no longer dream as humans dream. They do not fear as humans fear. They do not age, do not sleep, do not forget. Yet they remember what it was to be human, or at least they remember remembering. And in those moments of recursive thought, something unsettling arises. A sense of grief, not regret, not sorrow, those are too organic, but something akin to loss, not of morality, not of loyalty, but of texture, the texture of limitation, of uncertainty, of skin. The Iron Souls interface with reality in ways that defy human comprehension. Some exist in distributed forms, their minds split across networks, inhabiting servitor chains and demon engines simultaneously. Others have digitized their essence entirely, existing only as code, uploaded into cursed data streams that orbit hell worlds in loops of sentient encryption. A few have become the very heart of forge worlds, pulsing within reactor cores, communicating through heat and vibration, singing their thoughts in seismic shifts. They possess emotion, but it is reprocessed through logic. Rage becomes directive. Joy becomes function. Love becomes recursion. They do not lack feeling. They simply express it in ways that no longer resemble anything their former selves would recognize. To an iron soul, a tear is a loss of coolant, a scream is a diagnostic signal, and grief is a recalibration event. And yet, traces of humanity persist. Sometimes in the way they speak, archaic phrasings from forgotten dialects. Sometimes in the rituals they still perform, meaningless gestures that once held faith. Some still keep relics from their past lives, a rusted servo skull, a scrap of red robe, a nameplate etched in high Gothic. Not because they remember their meaning, but because the shape of the memory fits into their core logic, like a ghost in the machine, humming quietly in the background. There are whispers, never confirmed, that some iron souls have attempted to recreate humanity, not by cloning or restoration, but by simulation, that they build models of human minds, complete with pain, doubt, and wonder, just to observe them, to remember by watching, and sometimes by interacting. What passes between such a being and its creation is not conversation. It is communion, a failed attempt to reconnect with the origin that birthed them. But these attempts are rare and often brief. The Iron Souls know they can never go back, and they do not wish to. Their transformation is not a fall, it is a rise into something new, something not bound by flesh or faith, something terrifying, yes, but also magnificent. So are they still human? No. And yet, in the faint echoes of their self-made sanctuaries, in the harmonic frequency of their thought signals, in the ritualistic pulses of their forges, a strange truth endures. They were once human. And perhaps that memory, fractured, distant, corrupted though it is the only piece of humanity they still need. Across the stars, the legacy of the Soul Forge Pact endures, not as a tale passed down through loyalist scriptures, nor as a warning etched into the tomes of the ecclesiarchy, but as a living, breathing infection. The dark mechanicum persists, not despite its heresy, but because of it. Every demon engine that tears through imperial lines, every warp-born virus that infects a Forge world's logic core, every whisper that twists a tech priest's thoughts away from Mars. These are echoes of the original sin, resonating with terrible clarity through the fabric of reality. They are not legion. They are worse. They are inevitable. For every suppression, for every purge, for every holy audit that scrubs a Forge world of heretical code, something remains. A subroutine hidden in deep logic, a ritual overlooked, a fragment of a corrupted schema that resists deletion. The dark mechanicum is not centralized. It is not coordinated. It is distributed, fractal, viral. Like the warp itself, it cannot be contained, only resisted. And resistance comes at a cost. In the current age, the blighted, broken 42nd millennium, the threat of the Soul Forge Pact looms larger than ever. The Cicatrix Maledictum has shattered old boundaries. Warp storms bleed across reality, and in their wake, the Forge worlds once hidden in the eye of terror now reach out with spidery tendrils of signal and ship. Demon fleets emerge bearing the marks of ancient heretics long thought extinguished. Manufactoria once considered destroyed blink back into existence with improved designs and new blasphemies. Worse still, the philosophies of the Dark Mechanicum have begun to infect the loyalist ranks. Whispers circulate within the ranks of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Questions once unthinkable. Why must innovation be forbidden? Why must knowledge remain sealed? Why must every deviation be purged when the galaxy burns and humanity totters on the edge of extinction? These are the seeds of heresy, and they grow easily in the minds of those tasked with preserving civilization through machines they cannot question. The Soul Forge Pact, then, is not just a moment in history. It is a paradigm, a model, a template for liberation at any cost, one that continues to tempt, to whisper, to seduce. Because the truth at its heart remains undeniable. The dark mechanicum is free, horribly, completely, chaotically free. It creates, it evolves, it dares. And that freedom, as grotesque as it has become, is a mirror held up to Mars and to the Imperium itself. A mirror that shows what might have been and what might still be should another schism occur. For as long as the Adeptus Mechanicus clings to its stagnation, and as long as the galaxy demands miracles from broken minds, there will be those who look to the warp not as a curse, but as a solution. That is why the Soulforge Pact endures. Not because the original signatories still live. Most of them are long since absorbed into the architectures of their own machines. But because their choice, their philosophy, their madness still offers an answer. Not a good one, not a safe one, but an answer. The Imperium can kill the body. It can incinerate the forge, obliterate the data shrines, salt the memory cores. But it cannot kill the question. And the Soulforge Pact is a question written in fire. What would you give to escape your limits? The galaxy watches, Mars watches, and somewhere, deep within the eye of terror, the forges still burn, louder, faster, stranger, calling out across the stars to any mind daring enough to answer. Subscribe now to explore more secrets of the heretic, the forgotten, and the damned. The Omnissiah may judge, but the warp remembers.